What I have here is the Leica M10 black chrome version from 2017 and this Yashica Electro 35 MC from 1972.
Like your TV show, what is it called?
Dog Times. Funny story about this camera, I found it in a shoebox in a pile of junk in a guy's driveway. And he didn't know if it worked, and so he gave it to me. I went to the local camera shop, shout out to Pro Photo Factory, and got the cheapest, most inexpensive roll of color film that I could find, which was Fujifilm 200, just to see if this camera even works. This is the very first shot. It turned out to be a half frame because it was, the beginning of the roll. I was able to squeeze 37 exposures out of this. I get asked all the time, they would like to see comparisons of something like the Leica M10 versus film. I do have a handful of videos on this channel where I have done that with the Leica M6, usually with either CineStill 800T or 400D CineStill. I'll leave some videos in the description down below. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna show the colors directly out of the camera, and then I'm gonna show you one of my favorite kind of color grades that I like to use in Lightroom, so you can kind of see the difference between that and what you'd get out of the Leica M10 versus like if you want to do a specific preset or something of your own. You can see kind of what I do to keep a consistency with all of my photographs, and then versus the Fujifilm 200. So there was no real way to test this because this is an aperture priority only camera. You can't change the shutter dial. So the only real way to check it, obviously, is just to open it up and kind of go through the f-stops here, that each one is working. This camera is very inexpensive. They make an all black version where those are a lot more popular, but these are very, very inexpensive point and shoot cameras. Very, very tiny size. I mean, you can see the size of this thing compared to something like the Sony RX100. The cool thing is that even though how tiny this point and shoot film camera is, it is still a full frame 35mm. So there's a lot of cameras that have come out this year in 2024 that are actually bigger than this Yashica, and they're only half frame cameras. They're actually a lot of plastic parts too. So a lot of this thing is metal. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. This isn't the greatest side-by-side comparison, and it's mainly because the Yashica camera, unfortunately, is automatic exposure. Plus, this Fujifilm 200 is not my film stock of choice. Like I said at the beginning of the video, it is the cheapest film stock at my local camera store. But again, guys, I found this Yashica camera in a shoebox in a pile of junk in a random dude's driveway. So I didn't know if this experiment would even work out at all. Let me know in the comments down below if you'd like to see a certain film stock compared to the M10, and I'll use it in my Leica M3 so we can get a true side-by-side comparison in terms of exact exposure and everything. Because again, you can't even tell what exposure the Yashica is using because it's just aperture priority with no shutter dial whatsoever. As you'll notice on the bottom here, it takes little batteries. And I did put a brand new battery in there, obviously. And what's supposed to happen is when you hit the shutter, this little green light is supposed to come on. It doesn't always come on though. So, I mean, again, I found this in a dude's driveway, so I'm sure maybe it got rained on, so some of the electronic contacts in there got messed up. However, the flash still works. It does have a little PC sync flash port on the left side here. The exposure counter, I guess, kind of works. However, there's no numbers on it. You don't see any numbers on it until it gets near the end of the roll, and then you'll see a red 36 in there. So I was looking around online. I found this one on Etsy for 70 bucks, and you'll notice this one definitely has an exposure counter. So mine was broken. Weird thing is when it got to the red 36, it still popped up. So it looks like there's two little discs in there. This one also had a Vivitar filter. So just some quick features on this. Again, it's aperture priority only. There's no real way to focus the lens, zone focus only. It's got a little tiny 40mm f2.8 Yashica pancake lens on the front of this. It's an f2.8 up to an f16. The aperture ring does have the little Sunny 16 scale on it, so that was kind of cute. On the lens itself, there's a self timer here on the left side, and then over here on the right side is where you can change the film ASA from 100 to 1000, all with this little lever on the lens. The downside with that is that it does get knocked around. So a couple times I would look down at the lens and it would either be above 200 or below it. So the exposures were kind of all over the place, as I'm sure you've noticed by now. That's just one of the downsides of having an automatic exposure camera where you have no control of what's happening. The M10, the 40mm Leica Summicron is slightly wider than the Yashica 40mm. It's nice for me to do this, seeing my color grade next to real film. And what I've noticed is it matches pretty well. They both kind of successfully blow out the highlights, but I'm worried that my color grade is losing too much contrast in the skies. So I think I need to work on that. Here you'll notice the clouds, and then there they just disappear. So yeah, I'm gonna have to work on that. There, you can really tell how wide the Leica is compared to the Yashica. All in all, I was really impressed by this lens. You'll see these shots of Marianne out here on the bike path bridge, and I was really impressed with those. Now, that was super bright out there, so I believe I did probably have the camera at like an f11, maybe even an f16. So it does really, really well when it's properly exposed there. That was before the switch on the ASA got switched around. Mainly, I was impressed by the quality of the lens, because this is just a little cheapo lens here, what appears to be a cheapo lens. It's only a 4 elements in here. Apparently, I think it is actual glass elements, or at least it appears to be. I was really impressed by those two shots of there. The shutter is very, very quiet on this little guy. My favorite feature of this little cheap and inexpensive film camera is it does have a shutter lock. So that is really cool. I wish my Leica M3 had that. It's just nice to save exposures when you throw your camera in your bag or something. You'll notice on the front of the little lens here, there is a little sensor there. So I imagine that's for the camera's internal light meter. All in all, not too bad. The video was shot with an RX100 Mark VII, by the way. I did a goofy review of that little camera, and that is my go-to pocket cam. Specifically bought it for quick little pocket video, but it also does great for still, so I'll leave a link to that video down below as well if you missed that one. Overall, I was really impressed with this little driveway find free camera. As far as the M10 goes, I watched a video recently where a guy was talking about how he very convincingly said that everyone using a digital Leica M is really just chasing film, and they just want to pretend like they're shooting on film. Being someone who has been shooting on digital Leica cameras for the past 3 years, I think I can agree with that. It does kind of feel like that. These Leica M cameras, the digital ones, are so simplified. The basic controls, you just get ISO, shutter, aperture on the lens, of course. I love the rangefinder experience, but he is right. That's everything that you would get out of an analog as well. With that being said, yeah, I don't know if something like a digital Leica camera is worth it. Certainly if you already have an analog Leica M. I think if you're going to spend the amount of money that you would spend on a digital Leica, it would actually probably make more sense to either spend less money on an analog Leica, or you get way more punch for way less money and get all the bells and whistles with a really awesome Sony camera, right? Like, you get something like the A7R5 for like half the price of even this really old Leica M10. God forbid if you're looking at something like the Leica M11, I mean, at that point you might as well get like the A1 Mark II, in my opinion, because I understand it now, right? That I've been using all these different cameras for the past few years now, and it does make a lot of sense. You can get way more mileage out of something like a Sony A7R5 or even the Sony A1 Mark I, in my opinion. It's just way more. You get macro abilities, you can adapt literally any lenses to those things. And then of course, if you use native glass, you get all the wonderful features of the super fast autofocus for planes and trains and automobiles and humans and insects and pets, and it's just insane. Not to mention, you could even use your Leica M glass on those Sony cameras. And you can even use macro lenses, and you can even scan your own film with something like the Sony A7R5 or A1s or anything like that. So yeah, I don't know if spending buku bucks on a digital Leica M is worth it, especially if you already have an analog Leica M. It seems a little pointless. Unless you're worried about wasting a lot of money on film, then I guess that makes sense. But there are so many options out there. I mean, literally you could have this little tiny pocket cam for less than $100. And for the most part, you would get the similar results that you would out of any other analog camera, whether it's Leica or anything else. I say almost because you're still not able to control the exposure on this camera because it is aperture priority only. I don't really like that. I'm not a fan of that. For one, it makes me nervous of not knowing what the shutter is doing. But as you can tell, I mean, this camera being from the early 70s, really quite surprising results, to be honest. Anyways, let us know your thoughts on all of this. And thanks for hanging out. So if you're still watching at this point, then I imagine you enjoyed the video. And if so, I encourage you to check out my Patreon. I put out a weekly video over there, and it's a great way to support the channel for just the price of a Happy Meal. Thank you. Thank you.
Doesn't matter who we are. What matters is our plan. No one cared who I was till I put on the mask.
I am cinema.